Do you think Ben was the hardest debate you've ever had?
What's different when you debate Ben?
Had like a unique approach to Ben, but it all stems out.
Who do you think won the debate? Photo of you and Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
I want to know how that conversation went.
It was definitely, it went from like conversation to like debate to conversation to debate to conversation. I think I was pretty happy with the level of combativeness. He seems like he's somebody that's able to ratchet it up and then kind of like bring it back a little bit and not be completely unhinged. I'll say there was like a 30-minute section on climate change, which I wish I could have been more prepared for because I was not ready for it to be a debate on climate change. He asked me for an example of like,
was that all right by you? Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on,
Yeah,
man.
really appreciate it.
thanks for having me.
So the Ben Shapiro debate. This is, I feel like, what everyone's been talking about. It's highly anticipated. We brought it up to you if you would debate Ben. You said yes. That clip went viral. We brought it up to Ben when we had him on if he would debate you. He said yes. That clip went viral. How did this all come about?
I'm kind of friendly with Lex, and I think I did a Jubilee show, and Jubilee asked me at the end, could you film like a call out to Ben Shapiro and maybe we could host it? Lex saw that and Lex was like, hey, do you think I could get this debate? And I love Jubilee, but Lex is like the guy that would let me have a 2 to 3 hour uninterrupted conversation. Jubilee will shoot 3 hours of content and they cut it down to like 45 minutes. And I just feel like Lex's platform would have been really good for that. So I was like, well, if you think you can get the debate, then go for it. And then Lex did a bunch of work in the background and he, got the debate.
Was that hard to schedule with Ben?
I probably, but Lex set all of that
He
up. Not
facilitated
me, so,
all of it.
Yeah.
Were you nervous for the debate with Ben?
Not particularly, no.
How did you prepare for that? Did you just go in, or did they give you topics to talk about and you could research them?
I think it was going to be a pretty broad conversation. So we went over, it must have been like 10 topics in like 2 hours. And a lot of the Trump related stuff is more, I'm just kind of like curious because it's such an easy topic on my end and such an indefensible topic on their end. I'm just more curious, like, how are you going to try to navigate this particular thing? But I've been doing a lot of political stuff for the past like 4 to 6 months now, ever since I started Vyvanse and stopped talking to Red Pillars. So, my brain has been pretty plugged in politically. So I felt like pretty okay to go on it. Yeah.
Interesting. You think that Trump stuff is indefensible.
Yeah,
Am I right?
obviously. Yeah, of course. Yeah, easily.
Huh. Well, I just think that like half of the nation, well, not half, but a pretty, what is it, 40% approval rating for Trump?
I know that the conservative approval rating is always very, 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 very high. Yeah.
My general thought is that I feel like it's somewhat defensible if 40% of the general population is somewhat in support of something, but that's beside the point. We want to know.
I find for the Trump stuff, I would just say most people just don't know the facts of anything that have happened. So when you don't know the facts, you think that like, oh yeah, well, people are indicting him for no reason. Everybody hates him for no reason. People say he stole the election for no reason. They try to say there's an insurrection for no reason. But when you actually lay out all the facts, then it's like, okay, oof.
But if you go up against Ben Shapiro, I mean, his whole thing is like facts. At least that's what he claims. So don't you think that he would at least have a different angle to attack it?
He criticizes Trump a lot, though.
The thing is, Ben Shapiro this is the funny part, is that when you go to the people that know, their defenses start to look, in my opinion, very wacky. So Ben Shapiro's defense of Trump was that he graves him on a big curve, so he gives him a lot of leeway, and that Trump would try to take over the government as a dictator, which he tried to do. But Ben feels like the guardrails are strong enough that he won't be able to do it, even if he tries a second time. We talk about like not grading presidents on a curve, but then earlier we said we take Biden's rhetoric.
Oh no, I totally grade Trump. I 100% grade presidents on a curve. Are you kidding?
Oh, okay.
I grade pretty much everybody on a curve.
Then I feel like
I don't treat my 7-year-old the same way that I treat my 9-year-old.
Sure, but I don't like that Obama. It feels like we're treating Donald Trump like a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old. I think we should treat him like the president of the United States. I don't think having a president that has taken like concrete steps to prevent the transfer of power, which he did with the electorate sham, which he did with Pence, and which he did with trying to capitalize on the J6 violence, a president that's taken concrete steps towards coupping the government, essentially. I don't know why that guy, we'd say, well, you know, it's Trump, he does Trump things. The guardrails held, I'll probably hold next time.
So, I mean, when we say we shouldn't, do you mean that he should be actually barred from office?
I'm just talking about support for him. I don't even think Republicans should support Trump. So it's more of an admission than like most people will make. I find that insane, but yeah.
Do you think Ben was the hardest debate you've ever had?
Probably not, but not because it was a dumb debate or not because he didn't know anything, but just because it was just kind of like surface level and everything. We kind of like hit topics, and then move to the next one on kind of a surface level way. So I'm sure if we had like a 2 or 3 hour conversation on like 1 or 2 topics, it would be far more challenging. Yeah.
Would you have preferred that to go deeper on each topic? Because I noticed it seems as though some of these topics are only like 10, 15 minutes long. They give you a few minutes, him a few minutes, another few minutes between both of you, and then it was on to the next.
There was a part where Ben was like, here, let me actually draw this out for you. And he looks for like a pen and a piece of paper to be able to draw this line curve of job production between like Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But then Lex was like, all right, we got to like take this back. We're getting a little too granular.
Yeah, I would definitely prefer that, but it's also like it's like a first conversation, so you have to buy a little bit of trust with the other person. I think it was a good conversation for a first conversation.
Are you going to have another one?
Hopefully. We'll see. There's nothing like planned right now, though. So.
What's different when you debate Ben versus somebody else?
Nothing. I try to take a similar approach to everybody in that, like, there's a dynamic approach depending on the person that I'm talking to, how radical or not radical they are, how reasonable or not reasonable they are, how much of a showman they are versus how much of a stick to the facts kind of person they are. So Ben, I'll have like a unique approach to Ben, but it all stems out from like the same type of dynamic approach I take to everybody.
The one thing that you mentioned in that debate that I did notice, and I noticed a lot of people doing this, is you would make a point and they would counter that point by not addressing the point, but saying, well, we shouldn't focus on this. We should focus on all these other things. Mm-hmm. How do you navigate something like that and get someone back to the point? It seems like a lot of times they'll avoid the point entirely.
Well, there are two different concepts you're talking about that sound similar, but they're totally different. In terms of policy, that was the one that I was focused on with Ben, and that I feel like sometimes conservatives will, I call it like the conservative merry-go-round, where anytime you want to address a thing, they want to address another thing, or if you want to make an incremental change somewhere, they'll say, we can't do that incremental change because it doesn't fix everything, so we should only focus on this. And that's very frustrating to me. So for instance, you might say something like red flag laws for firearms, the ability to flag people and say, this guy's probably a danger, maybe we should do something about it. They'll say like, oh, well, that doesn't fix gang violence, so we shouldn't do this. It's like, okay. Or I think the examples that we were going through in that conversation were in schools. Yes. I think air conditioning and food availability are like two of like the easiest, most data-driven, helpful things to children in school. And that would be a thing that could help a little bit, but Ben's point, which is true, is that, well, this is going to fix the schools. I was like, well, of course not, but it helps. Well, we need to fix like families or whatever, right? Correct. And I feel like anytime you want to focus on like a particular problem or try to help in an incremental way, conservatives will hop back one or two steps and go, well, it doesn't fix everything, so we need to do this radical society-changing thing, like enforcing shotgun marriages, I think was his solution. Okay, well, this feels...
Recommending shotgun marriages.
Yeah. Recommending, yeah. But I will say that's different than in a debate when somebody won't ever address a point you're bringing up, which I don't think Ben ever did that. I don't think he like avoided addressing a particular point. Yeah.
What I thought was really interesting is it sounded honestly kind of like a therapy session of like two like a wife and a husband that have been together for a super long time and they're having struggles in the relationship. Like you would say, man, I just feel like conservatives always do this. They do the conservative merry-go-round and they don't attack the issues where they have the control. And then Ben was like, I feel like liberals always ignore the iceberg. They're just focused on the thing that's above the waterline when there's this whole massive problem underneath it. And it was really funny, just like the difference in, I don't know.
Yeah, the reality is you have to come at it from both ends, but anytime you talk to somebody on the left or the right, they only want to address their end and then vent their frustrations about the other end, which is very frustrating. So anytime you try to bring somebody a little bit over to the middle where it's like, the family structure is incredibly important, obviously for a whole bunch of different predictive things in society, but also there's incremental changes you can make in schools too. We can do both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both, but people get really hung up on their particular thing. Yeah.
Who do you think won the debate?
I don't know. I mean, like I said, I don't think it was like a huge debate. Like I think we kind of like bounced through topics. I don't think that we, resolutely concluded on a particular thing where it's like, you're wrong about schools or you're wrong about Trump or you're wrong about whatever. It was just kind of our different perspectives in terms of how we viewed those things.
What do you think Ben would say? Do you think he would say he won?
I don't know. Maybe. I'm not sure.
I feel like people on the left would probably just say you won. People on the right would probably say he won.
Maybe, yeah, depends. Some people on the left will say I won because my points were better on like Trump or something, or they'll say I lost because I needed to push him way harder on other things. And I'm sure there are people on the right that say, oh, Ben crushed him because he said the things that they agree with, and there might be some people on the right who's like, Ben didn't do as good because he should have crushed him on these points or whatever. Yeah.
You posted on Twitter yesterday that you finally dressed up for a podcast or interview, and it was a photo of you and Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
I want to know how that conversation went. Was it more of a debate or a conversation that's not released yet? Because it was just filmed yesterday. I'm assuming this is probably going to be released before that. Maybe we could get some teasers.
I didn't expect him to stand up. We got into a physical fight about 45 minutes in, which was crazy. It's hard to say who won exactly because I'm just kidding. It was definitely, it went from like conversation to like debate to conversation to debate to conversation. I think I was pretty happy with the level of combativeness. He seems like he's somebody that's able to ratchet it up and then kind of like bring it back a little bit and not be completely unhinged. I'll say there was like a 30-minute section on climate change, which I wish I could have been more prepared for because I was not ready for it to be a debate on climate change. He asked me for an example of like in capitalism, do you know what an externality is?
Yeah.
Okay, so in when you're trying to deal with a policy, you might do a particular thing, or there might be a thing that happens, and there's an external effect that's not accounted for in your system.
Sure.
So like pollution, in my opinion, that's like the go-to good example of an externality, right? If you pollute a ton, you don't have to pay for it, so that's external to your system, and it's not factored into the cost. And as soon as I brought that up as an example, like, oh, well, here's an externality where government can help sometimes, then it was like, okay, well, the WEF and where they're trying to make us eat bugs, and Bill Gates and billionaires and the global elite and the UN are all trying to do this. And I'm like, oh, Jesus. And then we did like a 30-minute thing on climate change. So, yeah.
Why does he go from pollution to the World Economic Forum and all these other places? Like, what is their involvement in that? And what is he saying that they're doing that's negatively affecting society? I mean, I get the eating bugs thing. I've looked into this. It seems very interesting. It seems like crickets are a good source of protein.
Oh, boy.
You could feed a lot of people. You disagree?
No, you're going to get these people in your comment section now.
I feel like it's not controversial. It's like this seems like a fact.
I don't know about the crickets. Can you elaborate?
Crickets are like the highest source of protein that you could get. They reproduce.
But what does that have to do with WEF?
I don't quite know.
I want you to eat bugs.
Yeah, I guess they're like Bill Gates and the WEF, and this is like some high level. I don't quite know. Is seeming to think that we should force people to eat bugs. Because it's
and that way you'll own nothing and be happy.
Exactly, but it's a way that you could feed the planet. The amount of waste that
methane from cows,
exactly from cows or raising meat, is so absurdly high. But you need that for certain vitamins and proteins, and you get the same thing with crickets for a fraction of the cost. You could grow crickets anywhere; they reproduce very quickly. I guess it's the idea.
But we haven't tried this on large scale yet. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, what if we start having these crazy cricket colonies and they start gaining intelligence and then take over the human? We just don't know.
I don't know. I think if you want to solve a lot of hunger, it's probably crickets. It's probably insects.
I think people are going to say, like, come up with like a class problem, you know what I mean? With that, like the people on the bottom are just like, you know, eating crickets. But
you don't
while
look
the people
at
on the top get like.
Look at lobster though. Lobster used to be like the cockroach of the sea. Lobster did not used to be the culinary luxury that it is now.
Going to be the delicacy?
They could be. We don't know this. But lobster is now a delicacy, and beforehand it would be like, "Ew, you eat lobster? That's like for peasants." I'm saying a lot of things have changed.
Interesting.
But what are your thoughts on that?
This is where I'm at right now for political stuff. I think that it's probably true for everything actually. But you know how you might have like 10 or 15 different beliefs. You might think a thing about climate change. You might think a thing about vaccines. You might think a thing about the presidency. I think people like to have this idea that they have rational justifications for all of their different beliefs. But I think what actually happens is I think there's like constellations of belief systems, and I think you just inherit these from whatever social group you're in. And when you go into that social group and you inherit the constellation of beliefs, all of these beliefs kind of sort of implicitly rest on every other belief. And it's not really changeable, because if you pull out like one thing, it's like a Jenga tower, it all collapses. So when you talk to somebody, unfortunately, today about a particular subject, because of how homogenous and how huge these like political groups have gotten, I think you can make a lot of predictions about things that they believe about other things, and it all just kind of goes together. So if I ask you, for instance, about what you think about Andrew Tate, if you think that in Romania, if you think that the charges are trumped up and it's not fair what they're doing to Andrew Tate, you probably also believe that the WF is trying to control your life. You probably also think the UN is like a corrupt organization. You probably think that we should support Russia over Ukraine in the war. You probably support Donald Trump. You probably think the mRNA vaccines were rushed and are making us unhealthy. You probably you probably think like trans people are fake. There's like 20 different beliefs that like everybody inherits just on their social groups. And that's how I feel about, so when climate change comes up, well, obviously this is the ruling global elite billionaire class that's trying to force us to, they'll quote that one article, own nothing and be happy. So we're a renter society. They all want us to eat crickets. Yeah. Klaus Schwab. Oh, don't even get me started on it, right? It's always that type of thing, I think. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Chris Williamson brought this up when we collaborated with him, but he said if he knows about 3 things about a person and their ideology, and then he can pinpoint every other ideology, he doesn't really respect them. He feels like they're looking at life through an ideological lens rather than as an independent thinker, which I kind of agree.
It's true.
How dangerous is it when you notice yourself slipping into these, I guess, ideologies? And how do you prevent that?
So I wouldn't say I lose respect for people. I think it depends on the kind of person you are. I think there's something that's really, really important to keep in mind. There's a couple of important things. Is one, we live in worlds where you need some sort of like ideological congruency with the people around you, or else you can't survive, right? So for me, and you can probably find me saying this, I'll say things like similar to what Chris Williams says, like I shouldn't be able to predict every single belief you have based on 2 tweets. That's fucking pathetic, okay? In my opinion. But I'll say that. But then also, I'm not surrounded by a whole bunch of people that are kind of enforcing that ideological homogeneity. Like, what if it was the case that I've got really strong opinions about Israel-Palestine that are probably out of sync with a lot of younger people today? Well, if I was going to school and I was 21, would I want to make those opinions known? Like, what if that means losing half my friend group? And you can't lose half a friend group. You probably lose your whole friend group because now people have to make choice on who to hang out with. And the decision for an individual in like a social group that requires some level of cohesion, that's going to be a really difficult decision to make. So I'm understanding of people that, you know, kind of have buy-ins to their social groups and need to believe certain things to maintain membership with those social groups. I'm sympathetic towards it. The less sympathy happens when I'm talking to like YouTubers or political figures. I don't like partisan people or people that have a strict adherence to a particular ideology in the face of all other things and all other like data or evidence. So like, for instance, like, I don't think it's bad to support political figures. I think that's fine. But let's say tomorrow, the most 100% rigorous, factual, everything about this study, it was just true. You knew it was true if you read it. And it says that like socialism is the best way to organize society, okay? Personally, I'm a capitalist, but if that study came out, okay, well, fuck it. I guess I'm a socialist. If it really is the best thing, that's fine. But if you take somebody who's really smart, in my opinion, Ben Shapiro is really smart, but he's a conservative pundit, there's no way that he can ever make any concessions towards that particular thing because his audience are all conservatives. He's going to lose his paycheck, his money, his business, all of his employees' livelihoods will be threatened. So when it comes to people that are partisan, I think that I'm sympathetic towards individuals, but when it comes to larger figures, I'm less sympathetic because I feel like you guys are getting paid big bucks to do this particular stuff. You should be a little bit more fearless when it comes to exploring kind of the edges of your ideology or pushing into other ideologies. And
why don't you feel like the left has more representation like the right does?
Man, I don't know. The center left is like just not a fun place to be. Nobody really likes you. You have to fight. Conservatives will hate you just as much whether you're center left or a communist. And if you're center left, everybody online is going to hate you because the only people online are the far left, and those guys are fucking insane.
So why is nobody big on the far left? Why don't we have larger
the far left
people
are losers. They're crazy. And it's a super minority opinion. These guys are the most detached. They're all like millionaire socialist tanky fucks who like cheer when like Israeli babies are killed. Like they're actually fucking insane. They're unhinged.
So where's the majority on the left?
Like in the real world, it's probably like center left, but like those people aren't online. Like you don't find like black people between the ages of like 45 and 65 like aren't on Twitter, or like center left, like cosmopolitan liberals and shit aren't really on like Twitter anymore. So it's like young, white, affluent, very, very far left, in college kids. These are the people that dominate social media, I think, these days.
So what's the difference between that and people on the far right? Like, why are those people on the internet? I'm trying to figure out like what the commonalities
people on the
are.
far right, I feel like aren't super on the internet, at least now.
Sometimes
why do they have the personalities that garner so many views?
It's different and it's weird, but like I would say that like for the far left, I think this is a very, very, very small minority of all Democrats, like less than like 3 or 4%, if that. It's very, very, very small minority. But on the right, I would argue that like for radical right, I feel like you're really mad because I think that anybody that supports Donald Trump, I think is fucking crazy. And that's like 85% of Republicans right now. So they're way more visible. You see a lot more of them, but because a lot of them are literally ready to follow Trump off a cliff, they just are louder on the internet. Yeah. There is no like, I guess I'm complaining about being a center left Democrat. Truly being a center right Republican is probably a more difficult place to inhabit, I would imagine.
I would say it's difficult for us too, because we like to really have equal representation on the podcast, and it's difficult for us to find people on the left to have on because there aren't that many, and the people that we do ask, it's very difficult to get them to say yes.
They've denied us a lot.
Yeah.
Yes. And then some people, like, we ended up getting them on, but it took months of scheduling, whereas the people on the right, they're kind of just like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Why is that? Do you have any idea?
I think right now, when the left is kind of more in charge of like overall the media and they don't feel the pressure to be platformed because they are platformed, they probably don't want to jump on to controversial or debate platforms as much because there's more to lose, and their own audiences will attack them quite a bit for it. Like, oh, you're supporting them. Why are you there? They platformed this guy, or why are you in this show? Myron from Fresh and Fit was just there. Like, these guys are white nationalists. These guys are red pill, like blah, blah, blah. So it's harder because people on the left will hardcore audit you for going on places that they don't approve or talking to people that they don't like.
One thing that I've always found it really hard to grapple with is you think that if anybody supports Donald Trump, they're pretty much insane.
Yeah.
But that is still a significantly large population of a developed country of the United States.
That's pretty crazy.
So how do you not have this like shadow of a doubt, at least in your opinion, of like, okay, if so many people, and within this group of people, there are extremely intelligent people, they're very thoughtful people, they're very charitable people, they're very like open-minded people.
Find me some, and I'll show on this podcast we can talk to them. I don't believe that there are very intelligent people that support Donald Trump, but they do it with their head in the sand. Or if somebody were to say something like, listen, okay, yeah, Donald Trump is all these things, but like the tax cuts are good, and I like the economy a little bit more because he like tries to deregulate something. Like, okay, fine.
But here's the thing. Yeah. South Park did a great episode where you have like a turd sandwich and like a piece of diarrhea. I don't know, and you have to choose between the turd sandwich and the diarrhea. If you have Trump and someone else, I'm just giving an example here, and you don't like someone else, doesn't that then by default you're going with Trump? Does that make you
but that's
insane?
only if you're dumb enough to think that your choices are two things that are essentially the same. Like I said, I understand why some people support Trump. Like when I say that they're crazy, I don't necessarily mean like in a malevolent kind of way, or I'm sorry, malicious kind of way. Usually they just don't know anything. So they like Trump because he like owns the left, or like because people say this thing like, oh well, the both parties are the exact same thing. Like no, they're not. Like you're rich if you think that. You're wealthy and you're stupid and you're disconnected. If you actually think that both parties stand for the same thing, they clearly don't. Right? Abortion or Supreme Court justice picks are a really big example of that. Or support for like same-sex marriages are a big example of that. The difference in the types of legislations that both people have passed is a huge example of that. The different approaches to foreign policy are a huge example of that. Like the two parties are very, very, very different in terms of what they stand for and represent. The only way you can think they're the same is if you just don't follow it much, or if you're pretty wealthy and insulated and you don't really care that much and you just like whoever's the funniest on Twitter.
Yeah, it seems as though a lot of people will look, if it comes between Trump and Biden, people that like Biden and like the policies, but worry that his age is getting in the way, and say, well, between the two of them, I might pick Trump. Just because the alternative is something that I think might be slightly worse.
I like I said, find me one of those people and we can hash it out. It's just so not even close to true.
Okay. There's such a large contingent of people that feel
but they just don't know what they're talking about.
I just can't
bring them in front of me. Give me 10 of them. You could send me with 10 in a room every single time I talk to these people. It's always the exact same thing. Like, why do you like Trump over Biden? Well, Trump did way better with the economy. What did Trump do for the economy? Tax cuts. How did that help you? Do you even do your own taxes? You make like $24,000 a year. You save me more money than you retard. I actually take more money on my tax than you grossed in income because of your president who's a billionaire from New York, and this is the guy that represents you. Like, none of it actually makes sense. I'm sorry.
No, that's
I'm just saying, listen, when I talk to the people, it's always the same talking points over and over again. They have no idea about anything they're talking about. They like Trump because he's funny, because he represents a real anger that people have towards the system, and they want to break shit, and Trump is the guy saying, I'll break it for you. And that's it. That's the extent of the support for Trump. It doesn't go deeper than that ever. There's no policy analysis ever. There's no foreign policy analysis ever. There's no, like, what did Trump actually try to do to get reelected? Nobody even knows about like any of the J6 stuff or the elector fraudulent scheme or the pressure on the DOJ saying he was going to fire one of them, but they didn't write fake letters to state assemblies. Like, nobody knows any of these things. They just like Trump because he's funny and he seems like relatable.
He's playing a better social game. So at what point does that need to be acknowledged, that he is somehow appealing to people's innate feelings of, wanting to join him?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's two things. Well, one is it might end him in federal prison. So, I mean, depending, because he maybe played the game a little bit too much. Or two, people need to do a better job on the left of representing their ideas. And it can't be, average age 72-year-old white guy that goes on TV to talk to people.
At any point, do you think it's in the people's best interest to limit free speech?
Yeah, of course.
And where do you draw that line?
I don't know. It's a hard one to draw, but like obviously there's tons of limits that we all agree. I can't make plans with you, for instance, to go and kill somebody, right? And then go buy something to do it, right? That's conspiracy to commit murder. Conspiracies to commit crimes are arguably, it's just a speech element and then one step taken towards the crime that's not illegal. The obvious, like shouting fire in a movie theater is illegal. Leaking classified information can be a crime. Like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of free speech things that are crimes. Yeah, I don't know. It super depends. There's the Brandenburg v. Ohio standard for inciting a riot. Like, you've got to have the intention of inciting a riot and know that your words will cause a riot or whatever. There's got to be like imminent lawful or lawlessness that you're encouraging people to do, et cetera. Yeah, I don't know. That's very broad. It depends on, you need a specific example of,
How would you limit where to platform somebody? Or where they fall on that you even want to give them a platform to talk?
I'll platform anybody. I think, well, if it's popular enough, I think you should always be talking about it, right? If there's like a guy who thinks he's got like a rock solid argument for why we should sacrifice children to the sun god, and he's got like 0.0001% popularity, I probably wouldn't platform this guy. But for Donald Trump or all of the stuff relating to conservatives there, these are all very, very, very popular beliefs. There's a large segment of the United States population that believes in these things. So the idea that you wouldn't platform that when, 30, 40% of Americans believe it is insane to me.
I agree. I'm not a huge fan of the word platforming or platform, which I feel like it's kind of exploded in usage in the past couple of years. How could you have this person on? You're just platforming these ideas and stuff like that, which I think is just like, I think that thought, if you're thinking that's like plagued your brain.
I think the argument is that you're exposing this person to a wide range of people who may never have seen this person. And because we're the ones to introduce that person to a new audience, they might take on those beliefs.
But how do you know you're right and they're wrong if they have support from like, a non...
Well, to the person who disagrees, everything that person says is bad.
Right, but I'm saying it's up to them that's having that thought. If you recognize that thought, then you should probably look inwards and question that thought.
Yeah.
I think it's also a matter of like how equipped is that person to deal with it versus you. Like if I was the world's most intelligent flat earther, I could probably beat you guys in a debate about flat earth, right?
Yeah.
I would say the same. Yeah. I don't think I would win a debate against the world's best flat earth. I don't know everything.
The world's best, probably not.
Yeah. And that's probably true of almost every conspiracy. I think I know a lot about like Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, vaccines, but the top experts in any of these things could probably say almost anything to me, and I don't know if I could counter it. So if I have very strong moral beliefs about how I think we should feel about, say, like vaccines, I'm not going to bring on like the world's best anti-vaxxer because I'm probably going to get crushed in that argument unless I do a lot of very particular research for this particular debate. So I wouldn't want to like give this guy access to my whole audience where I can't counter a single thing he says. So I think that's fair.
Sometimes I think it's just the way you say it and with the confidence. If you say something with like 100% conviction, I almost can't disagree with it because I could just say, well, my experience is different, but if you believe that to be true, sure, go for it. But I don't agree. And just leave it at that. But I think a lot of people want that.
And if you say it in a very fluent way, people say fluency is a proxy for accuracy, which I kind of agree with.
Interesting. It depends on what you mean by fluency, but I probably agree with you.
Like if you're able to just kind of like go and just maintain a good
I would agree. I'd agree.
With the way that you talk. Do you think journalism is failing America?
A little bit, but I also think America's failing journalism. I think that they're very reciprocal. Like they feed back into each other, and the type of journalism we have today is very much a response to the type of things that Americans want to see. And I think we all kind of have to do a little bit better in moving towards a more responsible future.
So who's it up to first?
I would argue the journalists.
It's up to so we should set higher standards for journalists.
Well, when you say we should set higher standards for journalists, that makes it sound like the people need to move first because we're setting the standards,
right? You're right.
Yeah.
So you'd say it's the government needs to set higher standards for journalists.
No, journalists need to set higher standards for journalists, I think.
But why would they do that when they're financially incentivized otherwise?
I know, it's a hard one, right?
So how do you
But why would the people do it when the people like watching people screaming at each other and being the most part of it?
That's the problem.
That is the problem. So they feed back in. That's what I mean when I say feedback into each other. Because that financial incentive is the feedback mechanism. And then for consumers, it's the consumption lever that's their feedback mechanism. So they're going to watch the things that are entertaining them the most, and journalists are going to produce the things that entertain them the most, and then you're stuck in this horrible world.
That's the tough part. It's like you don't want to restrict them, but you do want to somehow incentivize them to angle a little bit more towards truth rather than...
It's human nature, though. That's why the news is so negative all the time, is that's what keeps people watching. And we've even realized it on my main channel of just like negative titles get 2 to 3 times the viewership than a positive title consistently. And it's one of those things where like, do you want to make a positive title that 1/3 of the people watch? Or you make the same video, the same message with a negative headline, people watch it and take away the message. We were even talking about this earlier with a podcast title. Do we say the 5 things you could do to get rich or the 5 things you could do not to be poor? The poor title, like this, it's the same video. But the negative connotation does better. And so from a journalistic point of view, it's like the negative is going to get more attention. People are more likely to click it. There's no reason for them to change that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one. I wonder sometimes, I don't know. This idea just popped in my head, so I might completely 2 days from now think it's the dumbest thing in the world. Sure. But I wonder if people are drawn to the negative stuff because their actual real life is actually pretty decent, even though people don't realize it. So you're like drawn to the negative stuff because it stands out more. Like, do I want to turn on the TV and watch like some happy, normal, ordinary story if like my life is like kind of boring or whatever? Or do I want to see like some exceptionally crazy shit? Because I'm thinking like if you take people in like really exceptionally fucked circumstances, like would they be listening to negative stuff all the time? Do you think they would? Because I feel like when I
yeah.
think of the people that have the most engagement with politics in a negative way, where it's really driving them crazy, I'm usually thinking of like middle class kids who are like, their life is fine. I'm like, why the this stuff makes you so miserable? Why are you fighting about this all the time?
There was something I saw of like the fear of loss versus the pursuit of gain. And someone fears losing $1 way more than they would pursue getting $2.
There's a lot of
like the ratios are like, the ratios are so skewed towards like, I'd rather not risk this little bit than have all of this upside.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that all of that was really designed to keep us alive. Like we have to be on edge because what if a lion comes out and like kills you or you do that one thing? Like it's more worth it to try to stay alive than it is to try to, we
had a psychiatrist on the podcast who also did crisis negotiation. And he said the reason why we're so fearful of negative things happening is because it's been coded into our genetics, into our DNA. Whereas back in the day, like Graham said, if you weren't fully perceptive of all of the negative things, like eating a certain bad fruit or like going into a certain bad part of the jungle where a lion could attack you, like that was the end of it. That was the end of your entire family tree, end of spreading your genetics, end of your entire life, end of everything. And we're so used to that like kind of scared mentality, the scarcity, that it's just kind of like stayed with us, even though we don't really have any of those like super violent threats. Yeah. It's still way more important when you're walking through a dark alleyway these days to think somebody's going to come and get you, rather than to just be completely oblivious of negative things that could happen, because that's the end of everything.
There's very little margin of error when it comes to your safety or
it's
your
possible,
life.
Yeah.
So
one thing that I absolutely despise about journalism is they can make certain claims about people, and then these claims, these alleged claims, they turn out to be false. And then they don't make content that would say, oh, sorry guys, I made this like claim about this person. It kind of ruined their life, but it turns out it's not false. And I'm sorry, I'll do better in the future. That just never happens. For example, this is a personal example, but it happened to my favorite artist in the entire world. His name's Rex Orange County. So he had a bunch of articles made about him doing alleged sexual assault. And then I was in all of his like fan groups and everything, and everyone was saying, I will never forgive him, even if he ends up being not guilty, because this is just such a disgusting thing, right? Okay. So he is incurring actual financial damage, reputation damage, measurable damages to his life because of all of these articles that came out. Turns out CCTV footage came out, proved him innocent, like actual irrefutable evidence. All the charges got dropped, and nobody made any content whatsoever saying that he was innocent. And now I still feel to this day when I meet people and they ask me about my music taste and I say, oh, I love Rex Orange County, they always say, oh yeah, but what do you think about that thing? It's like they all know about the alleged infraction, but nobody knows about when he was actually absolved from it.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem. Even if people did publish retractions, the retractions always get way less coverage than the original claims.
There was something that I saw on Twitter, and it was this huge follow-up of this, I think she was like a congresswoman or something, that said she was sexually assaulted in like the train station. And she pointed to the guy, and they caught the guy, and all these headlines went out about him. I was trying to just find his name. And then they pulled up the CCTV footage afterwards. And the guy just was on his phone, accidentally like kind of bumped into her like this and kept walking. And that was it. And then no one really reported on it, but they later found out how ridiculous this was, and then they posted it calling out this congressman. Maybe she wasn't a congressman.
And she probably didn't suffer that much.
No, she didn't.
How much this guy suffered.
But this guy, I believe, like lost his job. He was targeted. People like were sending him death threats. They were trying to track him down. Like
and the same thing happened to Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse had several death threats. And like you said, assuming your take on Kyle Rittenhouse case is correct, and he was doing completely fine thing, not in the wrong in any capacity, but he suffered horribly because of this thing, and hardly any media, well, at least on the left, more so on the right does it, covers it.
Yeah, I mean, that's bad. Of course, I agree. A lot of the coverage of those stories are really bad. One of the most fucked ones that I thought was funny was the bird watcher, the Central Park, I think it was in Central Park, the bird watcher guy who ran into the woman with the dog, and she called 911 on him. Oh, fuck, never mind.
No, wait a second, I remember this.
Yeah, it was
big.
That guy has a TV show now, I think, on like the Discovery Channel. His whole life got made for that, and that woman's life got destroyed. But basically, I think there's a recording of, I don't want to get the quoting on this wrong, especially if we're talking about misreporting, but there's like a video of him on his cell phone And she's saying something like, hi, 911, like there's a guy here, there's a black man here and he's threatening me and something like that. I don't remember she says something like, oh, like you're a black guy, like the cops are going to get you. I don't know if it was something specifically like that or if it was just her saying like there's a black man here and he's like, oh, you're being racist and blah, blah, blah. And he published that video and online and her life was destroyed. And obviously everybody said he was a hero who endured this horrible Karen white woman in the park, blah, blah, blah. But when you go back and you look at the actual Facebook post that the black guy had made on his Facebook, now I'm not trying to say that the woman was necessarily in the right for calling the cops, but on the guy's own Facebook, he said that he had brought doggy treats because this woman was bringing her dog to the park and he thought that the dog needed to be on a leash or something. And he brought doggy treats and he was going to try to lure the dog away from her so that he could like take the dog or something. And in that light, I'm like, okay, well, I kind of understand if he's threatening to do this because then he also threatened, like, I'm going to get your dog and blah, 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 that she would call 911 now because she's worried or whatever. It paints that story in a way different light. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of random stories where you get like half the, I mean, you brought up Kyle Rittenhouse. All of Kyle Rittenhouse happened because of the riots that happened in Kenosha, which was in response to like that 14-second Twitter video clip of Jacob Blake. Do you remember that? Black guy goes into a car with a cop behind him and he shoots him in the back like 7 times and it looks horrible. But the entirety of that was 2 or 3 cops were wrestling with this guy to try to not get him to go in the car that had like the 2 children of a woman that this guy had previously sexually assaulted. And the cops were trying to get him to not drive off with the kids in the car. So when the full story came out, in my opinion, the police officers were completely exonerated. Maybe they should have tried harder to take him down before him getting in the car or whatever. But initially, it looked like just some black dude trying to get in a car where the cops were bullying him and they shot him in the back for like 7 times for no reason, right?
Did anything happen to the police officers?
I don't remember what the follow-up for them was, but I know the Kenosha riots were in response to that video, the Jacob Blake video.
The problem with stuff like this is that you're financially incentivized to trigger negative emotions in people about a given enemy. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like it just lines your pockets more the worse you make them seem.
Cops, immigrants, black people, conservatives, liberals, yeah.
For me, I don't like the fact that they could make all these alleged claims, but almost state them as though they're a fact.
Yep.
Like there are some of these things where I read them and it's like, you know, this person took this person into the thing, beat them, and did this and this and this. And then at the end is like, allegedly, according to the complaint or whatever it might be. And it makes it sound like, oh, they're stating this as a fact and this is true.
I feel like for media, they'll always say allegedly if that's the case. But for
we
Twitter
out
and stuff,
no comment, you know.
For Twitter and stuff, it'll be, I always tell people like, if you see a 12-second video, you should always be wondering why it's a 12-second video. We all have cell phones. We've got CCTV footage. Like, if you're seeing 12 seconds of video footage, it's because somebody very specifically wants you to see only 12 seconds of video footage. That should say something to you, you know?
We had a conversation with David Packows. He was the guy from War Dogs, if you've ever seen that movie.
Nope.
And there was a major media publication, I think it was the New York Times, that made this massive article on him saying that he was delivering improper ammo to the Afghans, sourcing it through the US military. And then all of these secondary publications they cite the original publication, the New York Times, basically as fact. So as it goes down the line, people just start citing other things, and then it just eventually becomes fact.
Yeah, that happens, yeah. I notice sometimes when I try to track down like an original source or claim for something, I'm clicking and clicking and clicking. And what was like 15 different sources is actually only one. And then when you go to that one and you try to figure out where they got it from, you're like, yeah, that happens.
I got a question about Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
He was recently spotted in Russia. People are speculating he's going to be interviewed.